assignment yesterday or some of the students have
I see. Okay,
So-
I'll send it to you.
So I'll send you an email. Just
Okay,
add me
I'll
to
put
the-
it here. Okay, so last time we started discussing the notion of parallel transport. Okay, and we described physically what it means. So what we will do today is to try to write down a precise equation that tells us how to parallel transport a vector. So let me begin by outlining what we want to do. So let's imagine that we have some curve in the manifold which is not necessarily a geodesy. It's some arbitrary curve, but we can parameterize it by some parameter u, and let's suppose that u equal to 0 is this point, okay, which we'll call say x1, and here we have x2 at e equal to 1. Now let's suppose that we take a tangent vector. Well, we take a vector in the tangent space, not necessarily a tangent vector to this geodesy. We take a vector ni1, some tangent vector, some tangent. Let me write it more precisely. Some vector in the tangent space. Okay, so this could be some vector like this. Then we want to use the rules of parallel transport to transport it along this curve and bring it to the point x2. And we want to know what becomes of this vector under parallel transport. Okay, we want to write down some sort of equation that allows us to find what this vector becomes when you parallel transport it to this point x2. So we'll use the definition of the parallel transport we gave, and that used the spatial coordinate system which I am going to do. So let's suppose that we take 2 points, nearby points, u and u plus delta u. Okay, so 2 close by points. And imagine that we know what ni of u is, okay, somehow, and you want to calculate what ni of u plus delta u is. Okay, suppose we know this and we want to calculate this. Now what we said last time is that to even define what we mean by parallel transport, we go to a spatial coordinate system in which the metric, the first derivative of the metric vanishes. So since we want to parallel transport from u to u plus delta u, we go to this point x, okay, which I will define as x of u, and find a coordinate transfer, find a new coordinate system, explain such that see x prime of u is nothing but the image of this x of u. So this, of course, you cannot set equal to 0 everywhere, but you can set it equal to 0 in the prime coordinates at one particular point which you are choosing to be x prime equal to x prime, the same point, this point over here.
We can think of it as the same parameter represented point if we don't change the parameter.
Yeah, so you are thinking of as labeling the curve. So here you want to change x to x prime. Okay, in the new coordinate system it will be some curve x prime of u. Okay. And the x prime coordinate system has a property that the metric derivative vanishes, okay, exactly at this point, okay, not necessarily away from this point. Then we know that by definition, parallel transport rule is that n prime I of u plus delta u is equal to n prime I of u plus order delta u square. Okay, we wrote it as delta x square, okay, but delta x is of the same order as delta u. So n prime of u plus delta u is differs from n prime of u by order delta u square, okay, but only in this specific coordinate system. Is this clear? So let me repeat again. So the rule is that as if you want to parallel transport at any given point, okay, if you have gotten the vector, okay, you first make a change of coordinates to go to the prime coordinate in which the first derivative of the metric at that point vanishes. Then in the prime coordinate system, the parallel transport rule is simple. You just simply take the vector, okay, component by component, and shift it to this point. Okay, by definition, n prime I at u plus delta is the same as n prime I at u. But after you have done that, okay, here we have to, now if you want to go from here to here, you have to use a new coordinate system, right? The new coordinate system, the one which makes the first derivative of the metric vanish here. And then in that coordinate system, you again parallel transport by the same rule. But in that coordinate system, of course, n prime I will become n double prime I, right? And that is the one which you parallel transport. But this, of course, is not a very convenient thing, right? We don't want to keep changing coordinates as we move. So what we will try to do is to rewrite this in some fixed coordinate system. Okay, even though the rule of parallel transport is such that in the spatial prime coordinate system, the vector transports simply. Okay. We now want to see what it looks like, what the parallel transport rules look like in some fixed coordinate system. Okay, where the metric does not necessarily satisfy a property like this. So we want to translate this to x coordinate system.
So can you tell me why you are taking that the change in the NIs
Yes.
is of the second order of u in this very specific?
Yes. So that was the definition, right? That we want to make these two parallel transport, you want to define so that these two are equal.
Yeah.
Okay. But we said that it doesn't make sense to demand that these two are equal, because suppose you have demanded these two to be equal, okay, in some frame. Now you can make a change of frame, okay, x prime to x double prime, such that in the x double prime coordinate system also this remains 0. Okay, because there are change of frames. Okay, this doesn't fix the coordinate frame uniquely, right? But in the new x double prime frame, okay, what is going to happen is that the second derivative of the metric will change, okay, and you will get an order delta u square term. So in other words, you can make this exactly equal in some coordinate frame, but it will not help because in another coordinate frame in which also this is equal to 0, this difference will become order delta x square. So this is the meaningful thing that you can do, right? Because once you have established this, right, then you can show that any change of coordinates that preserve this will also preserve this. Okay, because the change from x to x prime, okay, involves that these Pijk, those coefficients have to be 0. Right? If you want to change from x to x prime, preserving this condition. So the second or next order terms can be non-zero, right? That Cijkl term, but those affect this relation only to order delta u square. Yes, this was the reason why this was the most general thing we can write down. Yes.
Yeah, so it's a slightly naive question. So the expression that you have written here, as I understand, would be an element in the tangent space at u.
That's right.
Right? And what we are now looking for is a tangent at u plus delta u. So
Yes.
I don't see clearly why this would be a tangent at u plus delta.
Yeah, this is by component. See, what I have done here is that I have said what the components of the vector will be
Right.
at u plus delta. Okay. See,
But then I mean, we are not looking at flat space, right? For this to.
that's right, yes.
to
But we have made it flat. We have used this condition, right? It's as flat as we can get to for generated
so
space.
it's a
So in this frame, right,
Uh-huh.
we are saying that you will say that the vector is parallel transported if the component by component are equal. Now you can ask, is this a frame independent definition, right?
Right.
You take another frame, okay, nevertheless maintaining this condition.
all right.
Okay. Then you can show that in that frame, this condition will be preserved. Okay. You cannot control this term. Okay. That if you make this to be equal to some order delta u square in one frame, in another frame satisfying this, okay, the coefficient of the delta u square term will change in general.
Right.
Okay. But this equality, that order delta u term will never appear.
Okay.
Okay. So that's why this is a meaningful definition in a given frame. That in this prime frame, okay, this is the definition. Is this point clear? Right. So basically, we are saying there is a preferred frame, called preferred class of frames at every point, and we first define the notion of parallel transport in that preferred class of frames. Okay. That in that preferred class of frames, we just translate the vector exactly as if you are translating in the Euclidean space.
Right. So essentially, you're looking at a really small neighborhood of that point.
Exactly.
by
Yeah.
translating this.
Exactly. Because this we are writing as order delta u square. Right? These terms you have no control over.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Okay. But eventually, of course, you have to want to get to
Right.
this picture.
Yeah.
But we'll get there by taking infinitesimal elements, and on each infinitesimal element we'll apply this criteria. So now the idea is that we want to convert this to the x coordinate system. Okay, and see what we get. Now in the x coordinate system we have written down the transformation laws. So ni of u will be given by del xi del x prime del x prime t in prime t of u. This is what we have found the transformation law, and this has to be evaluated at x prime of u. On the other hand, ni of u plus delta u will be given by del xi del x prime k at x prime u plus delta u times n prime k of u plus delta. Okay? But this, by definition, is the same as n prime k of u. That's what this says, right? Plus order delta u square, which we will not worry about. Okay, we can replace it by n prime k of u if we are willing to ignore terms of order delta u square. And so with this, I can now write this. This one I can Taylor series expand around x prime of u. Okay. So this I can write as del xi del x prime k at x prime of u plus del 2 xi del x prime k del x prime l plus times x prime k x prime l of u plus delta u minus x prime l of u. Is this clear what we have done? We basically took this and Taylor series is expanded around the point x prime of u. Okay. So this is the first term, this is the second term in the Taylor series expansion, okay, which is of course of order delta u, right, because this is the proportional difference. And then since you are ignoring terms of order delta u square in here, you don't write the other terms. Okay. And here n prime k u plus delta u are replaced by n prime k of u, because these two differ by terms of order delta u square. So now we can calculate the difference. So Ni of u plus delta u minus Ni of u is so it's basically this.
First term will get cancelled.
First term will get cancelled, so it's just
Second derivative.
so del to x prime del x prime q del x prime l n prime k q and then this difference. So these difference are write as dx prime l du times n. Plus order delta u square. Is this okay? Okay, just picked up this term. So using this, of course, you cannot write a differential equation, okay, because this difference is nothing but dni du times delta u, and then we simply take delta u to zero limit, in which case it's justified to ignore this, and we get a differential equation of the form dni du equal to del 2 xi del x prime k del x prime l times n prime q dx prime l. Okay. Now this is good, but it's not yet completely satisfactory, because if we want to apply this differential equation, okay, to integrate, it still has the annoying feature that at every point, okay, you have to first go to the prime coordinate system, right? Then calculate these derivatives, see how the relation, how xi is depend on x prime, right? Calculate these derivatives, calculate these and put it back, right? We want to write something that is purely in terms of the unprimed coordinate system, right? Because then we never have to go back to the prime coordinate system.
So one term can be removed if delta x prime L is taken to this side. It's in
Yes.
the denominator. And dx prime L du delta x prime L.
So this will basically become ddu of something.
One x
Yeah,
prime L.
ddu of something. Right? Yes, that you can do, but you still have some other features. So we'll try to get rid of this somehow and write in terms of unprimed quantities. Now, to do that, it's clear that we have to use the important information that the prime coordinates are spatial. Okay, prime coordinates are the ones in which the first derivative of the metric vanishes, okay, or the gamma, the Christoffel symbol vanishes in the prime coordinate system, right? Without using that, of course, it doesn't make sense to write this equation, right? Then what is the prime coordinate system doing here, right? My prime coordinate system is a very specific coordinate system in which the Christoffel symbol is 0. Okay? So you have to somehow make use of that. Okay? Nevertheless, you don't want to use prime coordinate system, right? The final expression, you want to get rid of all the prime coordinate system. So the way to do this is to see how the Christoffel symbol transforms between primed and unprimed coordinate system. Okay, so this is something we had written down, okay, and it was left as an exercise for you to do this. So let me write this. So gamma prime L mn x prime was given by del x prime L del xi del xj x prime n xk x prime n. And let's write it down by inspection. Gamma I j k of x, and then there is a term that involves del x prime L del xk del xk x prime L x prime. Now you know that this is 0. So using this, we see that this quantity now can be expressed in terms of the rest. Okay, we have to somehow get rid of this term. Okay, but once you have gotten rid of this term, then this can be expressed in terms of the rest. Now, we should have by now enough experience to see how to get rid of this term. Because if you want to get rid of this term, what should you do? Yes? Multiply by del x. Okay, see del x k we cannot do because k is already contracted, right? So you have to get rid of, use a free index, right? So you call it del x free del x prime, right? Multiply the whole equation by del x p del x prime. That will give a delta pk, making this into del 2 xp. And then we do see whatever happens to the other rest. So we get del 2 xp del x prime m del x prime m one term del xp del x prime l. So here L is free index, so you get a delta ip. Okay, that converts this I index to p index. So plus gamma p jk x times del xj del x prime m del x k del x prime m of 0. So this we know now how to deal with, right? We just use that to substitute. These also we know n prime k of u is del x prime k del x r n prime r of u, sorry, nr of u. Okay, this is a transformation law that we have found for the tangent vectors. And finally dx prime l du, dx prime l du is del x prime l del x s dx is dt. Okay, so just substitute everything into this expression. Okay, all three that we have there, we just substitute and that gives you an equation for dNID. Is this clear? So I'll leave as an exercise to check. That the final equation that we get is dNI du as gamma I pq of x of u np dx q. Okay, basically what happens is that all of these factors, the x prime is factors which involve x prime, they go away because they get contracted and gives you the Kronecker delta. Okay? Effectively, at the end, we have no reference left to the x prime coordinate system. Okay? And this equation then we can easily integrate in principle, right? Because now we choose, we don't have to change coordinates ever. Right? We fix our coordinate system, draw a geodesic or draw a curve. Okay, not necessarily geodesic. And now given a tangent vector, if you want to parallel transport it, you will simply solve this differential equation. So this differential equation, if you have in a d-dimensional space, we have d first order equations, first order differential equation.
So this will be del x p.
This will be del x. This one? No, I think this the p index is here.
The index is free index.
P index is free index. Right? So the only contraction is
J and K.
J and K. Okay, there's no, but there's only you can contract these indices. Okay, so what I say is that if you have a d-dimensional space, then a tangent space is also d-dimensional. Okay. So we have d first order differential equation. So if the initial vector is given, okay, if you are given a vector here, so n1, which means giving d initial conditions, then this differential equation is able to solve for this uniquely and get what n becomes at any point on this curve. Right? So that this is the equation for parallel transport. So this tells you in an arbitrary coordinate system how to parallel transport a tangent vector.
So in having this equation, this form of equation,
Yes.
we never used the equation of the geodesic element.
No, so this is not a geodesic.
So
So this the curve that you are on which you are parallel transporting is not necessarily a geodesic. Right?
then this u that I am choosing, that can be any parameters.
Any parameters, exactly. That's not necessarily affine parameterization. Right? So in fact, we will just check that this is independent of parameterization. Right? It's hard to look at. So let's start from here. Okay, suppose you have an equation like this. And let's suppose we introduce another parameterization u as some function of u. Okay, we use a new parameter. Then dni du becomes dv du and dni du, and dxq du, these are the only changes, right? dxq du becomes dxq dv times d. So this equation basically becomes dv du times the same equation written in the v parameterization. So as long as this is non-singular, this is not 0, we see that demanding that this is equal to 0 is the same as demanding this is equal to 0. Right? Which means that whether you use a u coordinate system or the u parameters or a v parameterization, the equation is the same. Is this point clear? Okay, so this equation is independent of parameterization. Okay, unlike the geodesic equation that we derive, right, which work in a specific class of parameterization, right, the affine parameters. Second useful property is how it transforms under a coordinate change. So suppose you go to a different coordinate system. Let's call it x double prime. Okay, because x prime we had chosen so that gamma prime ijk equal to 0. Okay, so take an arbitrary coordinate system x double prime. Now you know that dni du how it transforms, right? Or ni how it transforms, right? Ni becomes n double prime k dxi d. Okay, this is the way the tangent vectors transform. We know how these transforms. That complicated transformation law you have to use gamma in terms of gamma double prime. And this, of course, you know dxq du is dxq du is del xq del x double prime p dxq du. Use r dxi. Sorry. Yeah. So that's the claim. Okay. So this is again be an exercise. So basically you start from this equation and make these substitutions, right? Write everything in terms of the prime double prime coordinates. And what you can check is that this equation now becomes L xi del x double prime r times dn double prime r dn plus gamma double prime r q n double prime p dx. Okay, now this equation becomes this. Which basically means that this is equal to 0 is the same as demanding that this is equal to 0. Right? Again, as long as this is non-singular. Right? As long as this matrix has no 0 eigenvalue, demanding that this is equal to 0 is the same as demanding this is equal to 0. Which basically means that a parallel transport equations preserve their form. They don't depend on the choice of coordinates. which is of course not very surprising because after all we started from some definition of parallel transport and derived the equation in the general x coordinate system. Okay, so it better be that in any coordinate system it has that form. Okay, but you can, if you didn't know where it came from, but somebody just gave you this equation, okay, so you can check that this equation has exactly the same content as this equation. The third equation that we can say, check, the third identity which is also useful is the ddu of Gij of x. So you prove this. Okay, if you want to give a direct proof, basically this ddu of this will be the derivative of Gij with respect to x and then dx du. And then ni du, you have to use this equation. And then at the end you have to show that all the terms combined to just give you 0.
Norm doesn't change along the curve.
Yes, so this is a statement that the norm doesn't change under parallel transport. Now there is also a short proof of this, which is to observe that this quantity of course is invariant under the coordinate transformation. Yeah, so you can go to the prime coordinate and try to prove it. Right? In the prime coordinate, what happens is the following. That in the prime coordinate, of course, the ni's are fixed. Right? Ni's change only by order delta u square. Right? So the first derivative of the ni's don't change. Right? And these are also fixed. Because in prime coordinate by definition is something where the first derivative of Gij is 0.
So first term can be put to 0.
Yes, so the ddu when you calculate, right, then the first term you can put to 0 as well as these you can put to 0. Right? Because in the prime coordinate dni du is 0. Right? Because that was the definition of parallel transport. Right? N prime I is the same as ni up to order delta u square term. You can also see from here in the prime coordinate gamma prime is 0. Right? So the equation is simply dn prime I du equal to 0. So once you know that this is covariant, that this equation is invariant under coordinate transformation, then to prove any other identity you can always go to prime coordinate and try to prove it. So this parallel transport, okay, this equation also gives a new interpretation of the geodesic equation that we had derived. So let's go back to the geodesic equation. Which had the form d2xi du square plus gamma ijk dxt. Okay, this was a geodesic equation. This, let me emphasize again, is that it is valid only in for a specific class of parameters, the affine parameters, right? Not on all parameters. Because this equation is not invariant under u goes to a function of u. Okay, because it involves second derivatives, right? And this will mess up the terms. Okay, now let's suppose we define ni of u as dxi du. This is definition. So what is the physical interpretation of this? this is a tangent vector to the geodesic. Okay? Now you are not talking about a general vector in the tangent space, you are talking about a specific tangent vector, okay? And that is a tangent to the geodesic. Right? If xi of u is the curve, okay, then the tangent vector is just dxi du, okay, up to normal edge. Okay? So let's define ni of u equal to this. So this now can be written as dni du plus gamma ijk. Now one of these I will replace by nj of u, the other one I keep it as dx. It's my choice, right? Whether I can call one of them nj, the other one dx. But this is precisely the equation for parallel transport of ni.
So if we parallelly transport a vector, then
Yes.
we get the geodesic curve.
Yeah, so this tells us, so first what does this tell? This tells us that the tangent vector to a geodesic gets parallel transported along the geodesic. Okay. And this now you can in fact use as a definition of geodesic. Okay. You can say the geodesic is a curve
Through
which has a
the
property
vector
that its
can be-
tangent vector gets parallel transported as you move along the curve. This is an alternative definition of straight line. Right? In straight line in Euclidean space, okay, we had said that it's the shortest distance between two points. But you can also think of a straight line as a curve which has a property that its tangent vector, okay, to the curve at different points are all parallel to each other. Okay? Which means that if you start from a tangent vector, and then keep parallel transporting it along the curve, okay, then you get a straight line. Is this clear? So the point is suppose you start from a point, right, and a particular vector, okay, which you call ni at u equal to 0. Now you parallel transport to a neighboring point, right, you get some other vector. If you didn't parallelly transport, if the neighboring point, okay, ni had been in a different direction, okay, then this curve will follow some arbitrary direction given by ni. Okay, you just specify by hand what the tangent vector is at different points, right? That's the way you can define a curve in even Euclidean space. But if you say that the tangent vector at the next point, okay, the neighboring point is the parallel transport of the original tangent vector, that gives a very specific curve, right? That basically doesn't allow the line curve to change its direction. In flat space, right, if you say the tangent vector gets parallel transported, that means the curve cannot change its direction. So this equation basically generalizes that for geodesic, right? So this is another way of defining a geodesic.
So, other than geodesic, means if we have a curve which is not a geodesic, then this first equation will not work. Ni u equals to this.
No, you can still define this. This is the definition of a tangent vector,
But the first one.
but this is not true, right? And hence this equation doesn't hold in general, right? So the tangent vector along a general curve is not parallel transported. That if you take an arbitrary curve and if you take a tangent vector here and parallel transport, right, you will find something that's not a tangent vector to the curve at this point. Yes, it's only geodesics that have this property, that the tangent vector at any point in the geodesic is actually the parallel transport of the tangent vector at any other point.
When you are trying to parallel transport this tangent vector at a point, we have never argued that it has to be tangent vector everywhere.
Yes, exactly. Right?
If it is a tangent vector everywhere, then
it's
it
a
have to be a
geodesic.
geodesic.
Exactly. Right? Even the initial tangent vector in the tangent space that you started with
That is
did not
not
have
a
any tangent to the curve.
It's just a vector in the tangent
Yeah, it's just a vector in the tangent space. That which basically means that it labels one possible geodesic that passes through that point, but that geodesic doesn't have to be tangential to the curve that along which you are doing a parallel transport.
We can still understand it by flat space. If we take a circular curve, we can
Yeah.
draw several tangents at every single point.
Yeah.
And if we draw the tangent vector to those points, those tangent vectors are not parallel to each other.
Exactly. In flat space, they are not parallel. Okay, are there any questions? So now let's go back to the curve which is not necessarily infinitesimal. Is curve like this. We start from some point x1 and end up at some point x2. Let's suppose that we have some vector over here, and let's suppose that we ends up after doing parallel transport to some vector n2 over here. Now, if we look at this equation, this equation is linear in n. Okay, which means that if we take two vectors, n and n prime initially, and suppose n goes to n1 goes to n2 and n1 prime goes to n2 prime, then n1 plus n1 prime, if you start with n1 plus n1 prime, then that will become n2 plus n2 prime. That's the meaning of a linear equation. Okay. So this can be formalized by saying that n2i must have the form mij n1j. Some matrix times n1j, but this is independent of n1 and n2. Of n1 and n2. Yeah. So the point is that this equation is linear, right? Which means that if we take any linear combination of two vectors here, and if n1 goes to n2 and n1 prime goes to n2 prime, then that linear combination, say alpha n1 plus beta n1 prime, will go to alpha n2 plus beta n2 prime. Right? Because this equation is linear. Right? A solution to a linear differential equation, if you can superpose. Right? It remains a solution to the differential equation. Right? And that's what we are saying here. There is some matrix Mij which is independent of n1 and n2, okay, which relates n1 and n2 in this fashion. So what can this matrix depend on? Okay, it doesn't depend on n1 and n2, okay, but what can it depend on? In a given space time, okay, suppose we are given a given Riemannian manifold, right? So it will of course depends on the metric, but let's forget about that dependence, okay, but suppose I fixed the Riemannian manifold and the metric.
Which path it is taking?
So it depends on which path it is taking. C. Okay. So let's say that we write this as Mij, so we write n2i as Mij. I'll write it as it will depend on the initial and the final point, x2 c times n1j. Okay.
Does the term dxk du in the equation of parallel transport is carrying the information of the path?
Yes, that's right. Also the matrix, right? I mean, everything gamma ijk, for example, depends on the path, right? Because gamma ijk has to be evaluated at x, right? So if you are using a different path in the intermediate state, then gamma ijk is different. Right? So all of those things depend on the path.
If I define the path by some equation, try to define it by
Yes.
some equation which is like several addition of several geodesics.
See, path is of course, it doesn't really make sense to add geodesics because those are not vectors, right?
Yes.
It does make sense to add the ends,
Hmm.
right? Because these are vectors in a tangent space.
So I was trying
So-
to thinking in fashion that we can think of a small segment of line to get several additional geodesics. So every replacement of a geodesic changes my curve. So in that sense, if I just know the gamma matrices of the system, every point, then that will be enough to specify any path.
Yeah, but the point is, as I said, the path summing geodesics doesn't really make sense, right? Because it's,
Yes.
geodesics are not really vectors, right? Xi are, I mean, it's like if you have theta phi, right? They're leveling the coordinates on a sphere.
They are not.
Adding thetas or phi's doesn't
Doesn't
have a
make
natural meaning, right? But path you can describe by a function, right? You can let's say xi equal to some fi of u.
Yes.
Right? And when you say it depends on the path, it depends on fi, right? What functions you choose.
So here what C is what?
C is the path. C is this particular path that you have taken.
Means some function of it.
Yeah, C is encoded by this f of. Yes. Yeah, C is an abstract notation. C is the card, right? That goes from x1 to x2. Yeah, it's not a single variable. It contains a full information about this function. Now, let's consider I'll use the notation minus C as the path C but in the reverse direction. So that's just a notation. When I say minus C, that corresponds to path C in the reverse direction. And I want to see what we can say about Mij x2 x1 minus C.
Inverse of it.
Why?
Into this parallel transform.
If in the geodesic
Yes.
if in the parallel transfer equation we change u to 1 minus u.
Yeah. So the point is that you have to make sure so not all equations are reversible. Imagine that you go from a point A to point B by suppose a particle is moving in the presence of friction going from point A to point B, right? If the particle traces the path back, right, it will not trace the same path back, right? Because equation of in the presence of a friction, the evolution equation is not reversible. Okay? So here the important point is that this equation that we have is reversible, right? Because that's what we said that it's independent of the parameterization. Okay? So let's suppose you have the path minus C. Okay, how will you label it? Okay, you label it by some parameter V, which is 1 minus U. So that V equal to 0 corresponds to U equal to 1, and V equal to 1 corresponds to U equal to 0. Okay, this way you can label the path. Okay, from x2 to x1. So this is x2 and this is x1. Okay, the V is going in this direction. And to define Mij, suppose you knew nothing about the original term. Okay, you have just tried to define Mij. Then you will have to solve the equation dni du, sorry, dni dv plus gamma ijk ng up to dxk equal to 0. Okay, and you will say that our initial condition is that Nj at V equal to 0 is given by N2 and fine. But because under, if you now make the substitution V goes to 1 minus U, this equation becomes identical to the original equation, right? Because that change doesn't change the equation, right? The form of the equation remains the same. So which basically means that you can, instead of trying to solve this equation, you can try to solve the original equation, but just reinterpret the question in a slightly different way. Okay, so this is the original equation. Reinterpret the question that you are trying to solve the same equation, but imagine that you have given the boundary condition at u equal to 1. Okay, nj is equal to n2. Okay. What will be the solution at u equal to 0? Is this point clear? This is the first order differential equation, right? Earlier you had said that to construct this matrix, we solve we gave the boundary condition at u equal to 0, right, which is started from n1, and we asked what is the value of the vector at u equal to 1. Okay. That's what gave rise to this equation over here. Now we are simply asking what happens if at u equal to 1 the vector is n2. Okay, what will the differential equation give at u equal to 0? And it's clear that the solution is n1, right, because it's the same differential equation, right? So whether you put the boundary condition at the initial point and the final point, okay, it doesn't matter. So that tells us that n2, now n1 is the same solution, same equation, same solution. So m1 will now be given by m inverse of m of x1, x2, c inverse ij times n cross g. But by definition, this matrix. So this is what we got from this argument. But on the other hand, by definition, n1i is given by m ij of x2, x1 minus c of m. Okay, this is the definition of m of x2, x1 minus c, traveling along a curve in the reverse direction, and hence these two are equal. Okay, because this has to hold for any vectors n1, so these two must be equal. So let me write it here. We get that m x1, x2, c. The ij component of this is m x1, x2, c inverse x2 inverse ij. Is this clear? Okay, so the parallel transport, so you go from x1 to x2, come back from x2 to x1, you get back your original vector, right? So parallel transport is reversible, but this is not true for arbitrary differential equation, right? Not all differential equations are reversible. Okay, if for example, this term had been mod, it would not be reversible. If we had put an absolute value here, right, this equation will not be reversible, right, because under u goes to 1 minus u, right, this will change sign but not this one. Okay. But here this equation as it stands is reversible. Okay, you parallel transport from A to B and then come back from B to A along the same curve to get by the original vector, and that's what this equation tells us.
Is there any general notion to which we can look and say that this equation is reversible and this one is not?
Well, if under u goes to a minus u, right, all the terms in the equation change in the same way, and then it's reversible. Because it's like, I mean, in the presence of friction, right, if you write Newton's law in the presence of friction.
Is one first derivative?
Exactly, because your first derivative and the second derivative. Second derivative doesn't change sign, but the first derivative changes sign, right? That's the reason why it's not reversible. So now let's consider a related issue. Take two cars joining x1 and x2. C1 and C2. So in general, M x1 x2 C1 is not equal to M x1 x2 C2. Okay, and we will try to determine under what condition these are always equal. But in general, there is no reason to expect that these should be equal. Now consider the following object M x1 x1 C1 minus C2. Okay, so this means that your initial point is x1, final point is x1, and what is the card? C1 minus C2. So C1 will go like this and then come back like this. So this, it should be clear, can be thought of as composition of two transformations. That first you go along this. Suppose you can start the parallel with some tangent vector n1. Okay. That n1 will first go into n2 along this curve, okay, which will be multiplied by this M associated with this matrix, and then that n2 will be transported back to some n2 prime or n1 prime by this matrix, okay, the matrix for this. So this I can write as the vector, the matrix that acts first will be on the right, because you are thinking of it as a multiplication from the left. So M x1 x2 C, and then M x2 x1 minus
C2.
sorry C1 minus C2. But this is nothing but M x1 x2 C2 inverse. C1. But we have said that in general this matrix and this matrix are not equal, right? So that means that this matrix in general is not identity. Okay, it's not trivial, right? This is not identity in general. So which means that if you start from a vector here, some tangent vector, and parallel transport along this closed curve, in general, it doesn't come back to the original vector. Okay, it comes back multiplied by a matrix. So matrix of this kind, where the initial and the final points are the same, they have a name, they are called monodromy matrix. So M X, X, C, okay, where C is some closed card. This is called monodromy matrix. So, in general, I can write n prime I as m x x c I j n j. Okay, or let me write that n2. Let me write that n tilde. Okay, so nj is the initial vector at x. Initial vector at x, and this one is the final vector at x. Okay? So let's see how this equation changes under coordinate transformation. Okay? So suppose we have a monodromy matrix like this, we go along a path, it comes back to some matrix M. Okay? Now we want to see what happens in a different coordinate system. Okay, we go to x, from x to x prime. So in a different coordinate system, n prime tilde I, okay, you know how it transforms. This goes to del x prime I del x p times n tilde p. But n tilde p, we know we can use now this equation. So this is del x prime I del x p m x x c p q n tilde q. Sorry, n q. Okay, I am just using this equation. But we want to express everything in the prime coordinate system, right? So n q is not good enough. We want to write it in terms of n prime. So we write this as del x prime I del x p m x x c p q, and then we have del x q del x prime j n prime j. Okay, so this is the equation for n tilde prime I. Is this clear? Now suppose this was identity. Okay, suppose the monodromy matrix was identity. Then this is delta PQ. Right? Identity means it's delta PQ. But that means that this Q is contracted with this P over here. Right? So you get del x prime I, del x prime j.
Delta ij.
That is delta ij. So if m x x c is identity, then n tilde prime I is equal to n prime I, which means that the monodromy matrix in the new coordinate system will also remain identity. Is this clear? So whether the monodromy matrix is identity or not is a coordinate independent question. Right? The monodromy matrix by itself is not coordinate independent. If it's not identity, it will get transformed to something else. Okay? But if it is identity, it will remain identity. Okay, and you can also prove it in reverse that the only way n prime and n are always equal, okay, the n tilde prime and n prime are always equal is if m is identity. And you can show that if m is not identity, then this product can never be identity. Is this point clear? So let me repeat again. So what we have shown is that the monodromy matrix has a property that whether its identity or not is a question that is independent of choice of coordinates. Okay. This is something that cannot be said for matrices that connect to different points. Okay. And the reason for this is because if you connect two different points, then this has to be calculated at the initial point, this has to be calculated at the final point. Okay. And there, even if m is identity in one coordinate term, it will not be identity. Okay, because this matrix and this matrix will be different in that case. Okay. That this is at one point, this is at a different point. It's only for monodromy matrix when you come back to the original point that this question of whether it's identity or not is a meaningful question. In particular, if you take a Cartesian, the normal Euclidean metric, go to the spherical polar coordinate system and parallel transport, then the matrices which connect one point to another point will not look like identity. Right? Even if you know that the space is flat. Okay? But the monodromy matrix, okay, as we will see, will always look like identity. So let me now say what we will prove. Okay, so what we will prove eventually is that if the Riemann tensor is 0, then the monodromy matrix is always identity. The reverse is true in most cases, okay, except for some singular spaces like conical defect. Right? If you have a cone, for example, okay, then the Riemann tensor is 0 on the surface. Okay, it's of course the metric is singular at the tip of the cone, right? But everywhere else, the metric is flat. Riemann tensor is 0. Nevertheless, when you parallel transport, okay, you have a space like this. Okay. Then you can show that if you take a vector here, okay, and parallel transport by this rule, okay, go along this, you never hit this cone. Nevertheless, you will come back to a vector which is not the original vector. So the reverse can be not true, okay, but it requires that. Okay, there is a concentrated Riemann tensor around this point. So it can happen for spaces like this or spaces which are not simply connected. Okay, there can be spaces, for example, if here you take this cone over here, okay, and then you just cut off the tip. Okay, so then it's not part of the space anymore. Right? Then it's non-singular everywhere. Right? Nevertheless, as you go around, right, you will find there is under parallel transport, it doesn't come back to the original matrix, and that has to do with the fact that this curve now is not contractible. Right? That there is a hole in the space. Yeah, so these are some cases where the reverse is not true.
If it's flat with cone.
Yeah, this cone is actually flat.
Yeah, that is
Right?
So
Yes.
for plane also it is. In the plane we have a hole. And this is not simply connected.
Yes. So it's not that any time it's not simply connected, the parallel transport will give a non-zero result. Right? Plane with a hole, right? It is not simply connected, but the parallel transport will still give you back identity. Right? But the reverse is not true. Right? What I am saying is that if the parallel transport gives you identity, or if the Riemann tensor is 0, okay, and if you have a hole, sometimes the parallel transport can give you a monodromy matrix which is not identity. Okay? But the existence of a hole does not always imply that you have to have non-identity monodromy matrix. Okay? Plane with a hole is a clear example.
In the sense, if the space is not simply connected, that is not conformably ensuring my monodromy metric to be identity, or the other one.
If the space is not simply connected, then the monodromy matrix can be non-identity,
Yes.
even if the Riemann tensor is 0. Okay? But of course, it can be identity.
Yes.
Okay? If the Riemann tensor is not 0, okay, then you can always find cars for which the monodromy matrix is not identity. But once we go to the proof,
So sir,
this
your
will become
statement
clear.
is that Riemann tensor is 0 and the space is simply connected, then
Yeah, if the space is simply connected, non-singular, okay, then you can show that the monodromy matrix is always identity.
So, on a half space, it's not flat space.
Yes.
This initial and final means this monodromy matrix, if we come back to the initial point,
Yes.
that will not give me the same vector in general, means it is not
Yeah.
that is the monodromy matrix will not be identical.
Exactly.
So, but in this equation, can we see this fact that at a given x we can have two different solutions, because the vector is always parallel transport, whether we go by C1 or C2.
Yes.
We come back to the same point, but at that time the vector
Yeah, well, this equation is written in U. Okay. Imagine that you have a curve like this. Make it a little smooth. So this equation tells us that for any given U there is a unique solution. But a curve like this will be described, right, by starting with U equal to 0 and coming back to some other value. Right? U is always increasing another curve, right?
But
So that's the reason why you can come back to the original point in the X space, but in the U space you actually return to some other point.
but if we try to put any boundary, any cyclic condition, compactification in U space,
But that you cannot put in general, right? Because once you have put the initial condition, right, then you have no choice of what the final vector is. See, because it's a set of D first order differential equations, right?
yes.
So you
But in
cannot.
some special cases, it can happen after.
It can happen, yes. So certainly it can happen. It's not that the monodromy matrix can never become identity, right? Even in curved space, right, there are spatial curves on which the monodromy matrix may become
Yeah,
identity.
but like in spaces like where I go from U to 1, that is not putting me back to what vector we have started with. But if I take U to from 1 to 2, 2 rounds of in the same space, then it's coming back to the same value.
To the same value meaning?
In the sense the vector will be same vector. The
It could happen that you go once around the curve,
That is not.
you go to a new vector, you go once more,
Yeah.
and then you come back to the original.
Yeah.
So that can certainly happen, right? If for example the vector gets rotated by pi, by the time you have come back, right, then once you go back once more, it will again get rotated by pi and come back to the original vector. Right? So certainly that can happen. But let's see how much you can prove, right? I mean, all this is just talk, right? But ultimately you have to prove. I mean, and once we see how the proof goes, then it's clear under what condition what holds. Okay. So the analysis that will begin will be for a small curve.
means one point in the physical space is maybe two different points in the U space.
Exactly. Because the curve you always level so that U keeps increasing around the curve, right? So even when you have come back to the original point in the physical space, U has increased. Right? And so that's what we will do right now. So the problem that you will first start dealing with is that take a curve which is small. What do you mean by it's small? Its length, it's not necessarily a circle. Okay, let me write it as a curve like this. Its length is of order epsilon, is epsilons, or order epsilon. Okay, where epsilon is a small number. We will take some particular point on this, say x naught. So we start from here. Take some vector, tangent vector, n naught, and you want to see what happens when you parallel transport it back to the original point. And we will calculate it for reasons that will become clear. We will calculate it to order epsilon square. Okay, so far we have been doing things to order epsilon, but this time we will try to do it to order epsilon square. Is this clear? Now we will first parameterize this by some parameter u, right? Because the differential equation after all is in u. Now if we follow our original convention that u runs from 0 to 1 as you go once around the curve, it will have somewhat annoying feature that dxi du will be small, right? Because x is changing very little along the curve, right? X is net change in x, for example, from here to here is of order epsilon. So if you use u to run from 0 to 1, okay, dxi du will be small, okay, which is okay, but it's a little inconvenient. So what we will do then, we will take u to run from 0 to epsilon. Okay, just scale up RU, because this equation after all is invariant under scaling of u. Right? I can always take u multiplied by epsilon. Let's call it RU. This will have the feature that dxi du will be of order 1.
Now we are taking some sort of affine parameter because
No, it's not affine still. It's not a geodesic even, right? So an affine parameter doesn't even make sense on this. This curve is not necessarily geodesic, right? It's just that you have the scaled u, right? Affine parameterization requires a very specific choice of parameters, right? You have to change u to some function of u so that the geodesic equation is satisfied, right? So this is not affine parameter, it's just a scaling, right? To make things convenient, but it's also not necessary for what you are doing. It's just that to keep track of what order the various terms are, it's useful if you do this. So now let's try to solve this. Okay, dni du. We write dni du equal to minus gamma ijk nj up to dxk. So u is small, okay, and we can use that approximation. U is small, so we will use that approximation. And the way we will solve this is that first, on the right hand side, we keep terms of order 1. Right? Anything of order epsilon we ignore. Okay, keep terms of order 1. Integrate this, okay, up to u. So that result will be, we will keep correctly the terms of order u. Okay, because the derivative is of order 1, right, and you are only changing u by order epsilon, right, at most, because u stops at epsilon. Okay. So if you keep the order 1 terms here, okay, and integrate, you will get the correct result for ni to order epsilon. Then we are going to put that back here, so that the right hand side now is evaluated to order epsilon correctly, and then integrate it once more to get terms of order epsilon square. Is this clear? Okay, so this is a 2-step process. So let's first carry out the step 1. So in step 1, we only keep order 1 term. So I can write this as gamma ijk x naught nj of nj naught here, however, you have to write dxk du. We cannot simply put dxk du at its original value. Is this clear? Why? Dxk du. See, what I have done here is that because I have said gamma ij at any point x can be approximated by its value at x naught. Nj at any point x can be approximated by its value at x naught. But dxk du,
is of order 1.
yeah, it's of order 1 and it's changing also by order 1, right? For example, dxk du is essentially the tangent to this curve, right? And it's clearly changing by order 1. By the time you have gone from here to here, dxk du would have reversed its direction, right? So it's actually changing by order 1. Okay? Even when u changes the order epsilon. So here you have to really keep dx k du, right? You cannot make an approximation. Anyway, so let's integrate now. So ni of u will be given by ni naught minus gamma ijk of x naught and g naught, and here you get xk of u minus xk naught. Because these are all constants, right? U independent, only this is U dependent, so you can easily integrate this. Plus order epsilon square. Okay. So here it was plus order epsilon, but now you have integrated once. Okay. So order epsilon term, if you integrate, it's epsilon times U. U is of order epsilon. Right. So this errors the order epsilon. Now we'll use this, go back to this equation and now try to evaluate the right hand side, correct it to order epsilon. Okay, because you want to integrate correctly so that you get terms of order epsilon square correctly. Okay. So this time you have to be a little more careful. So we write dni du equal to, so here earlier you had replaced it by gamma ij of x naught. Okay. But now you have to keep the first correction. Okay, because you are trying to keep terms of order epsilon correctly on the right hand side. So it's gamma ijk of x naught plus del L gamma ijk of x naught times xl minus xl naught xw with a minus sign times nj of u. Okay. Here again I have to write nj naught plus or minus this term over here. So I have to change the index, right? Because already jk has appeared. Okay. So I will write it as gamma j pq np xq.
J is
So j is there, but j is the index of it. Right?
no, J is contracted.
J is contrasted.
Gamma ij is J.
Okay, so I should change this. No, this j is actually contracted with this j.
Yes.
So no problem. So the part is, I am supposed to replace this nj, right? This
Yes,
nj
yes,
is what I am
yes,
trying to
yes,
replace. So
yes.
basically I will change I to j here.
Gamma will contract.
Yeah, gamma will contract and this jk will become pq. So gamma j pq of x naught np of x naught and xq of u minus xq minus x2 naught.
This xq minus xq naught, that is my order epsilon term.
Yes, exactly. That's the order epsilon times dxl times dxk du. Yeah, I think we are okay with the index, right? There is no clash. This k, of course, contracts with this k over there. So now you see here, this is order 1, this is order epsilon. Multiplied by this is order 1, this is order epsilon. Okay. This of course is order 1, okay, this you have to keep. But we can ignore in this product the product of these two, because these are order epsilon square, right? If this is order epsilon square, when you integrate it, you will get order epsilon cube term, which is not what we are trying to keep anywhere, right? We want to keep terms of order epsilon to the right, on the right hand side, so that after you integrate, we get terms of order epsilon square correctly. So this I can write as minus, so first the leading term, minus gamma I j k x naught n j naught dx k du. Then let's look at this term plus ln gamma I j k x naught xl e minus x naught xl naught times n j naught dx. There's a minus sign because it's of overall minus sign. In the last term, this will make it plus gamma I j k x naught gamma j q x naught. Let me call it NP naught, NP of x naught over there. X q minus x q naught times dx dt. Plus order epsilon square. Is this okay? Is this so? Is this clear? That what we did, right? We integrated first so that we evaluate ni to order epsilon, okay, then substituted it back. Okay, then we integrated it. We substituted back to get the right hand side to order epsilon. Now we are going to integrate it, okay, so that we get the result to order epsilon square correctly. Right? Because integration always gives you a factor of epsilon, right? Because you are only integrating over a distance of order epsilon. Now we integrate this from u equal to 0 to epsilon. Okay? Epsilon is the end of the curve, so you have basically now close. We have in the second stage you can just close the curve. Okay, in the first stage we integrated to some upper limit. Okay, arbitrary u. Okay, in the second stage we just integrate all the way to the end of the curve or a closed curve. So when we do that, let's look at the first term. What happens to this term when we integrate?
It will be the same. Xk xk epsilon minus epsilon.
Yeah, xk epsilon minus xk naught. So how much is that?
Epsilon.
That is 0.
Oh.
Because you have come back to the original point, right?
Sorry.
In the x space you are back in the original point, right? So xk of epsilon minus xk naught is 0. Right? So the first term doesn't contribute. Right? But this is the reason why you kept terms of order epsilon square in the first place, right? Because the order epsilon term actually is 0. So you have to worry about these two terms. So you get minus del L gamma by jk x naught integral 0 to epsilon x L up to minus x naught ddu Nj naught. So Nj naught I can keep outside. Let's put Nj naught here. Okay, this Nj naught I am taking now. ddu of xk, but let me write it as xk minus xk naught. Well, this is just a constant anyway. This xk depends on it. Okay, because ddu of u of xk I can always write in this form. And then the last term plus gamma I jk x naught gamma j eq of x naught np naught xq minus xq naught okay, this is integrated. Okay, everything else you can take out. They don't depend on it. Is this okay? Now we want to match the indices. Okay, so just to make this look a little nicer. So let's leave the second term as it is, okay, and try to change the first term so that the indices match with the two terms. Okay. So this we can do by, let's say, so this index j is carried by p here, right? This is np naught, so I replace j by p. So j by p in here, and then L here is q. Okay, so I can replace L by q. Okay, there is no other index q here. So q from q. Is this okay? So then we get minus del L gamma I, sorry, del Q gamma I K plus minus gamma I J K gamma J Q polyvariative and it's not NP naught I can write it actually contoured closed. Initial and the final points are the same. X Q Q minus X Q dot du of X Q. Is this okay? Now this ddu I can integrate by parts. Suppose I integrate by parts, so you get ddu of this. Okay? But there are boundary terms, right? So what are the boundary terms? Boundary terms involve the product of these two between 0 and epsilon. At 0, of course, they are 0. Right? What about at epsilon? They are 0 because xq of epsilon is the same as x2 naught. Okay? So because of the closed contour, this wouldn't have happened if the contour was not closed. Right? But because the contour is closed,
Boundary terms will
the boundary terms will be 0, which means I can just put the ddu on this to the minus side, okay, without changing the result. Okay? But we will not do that. So what? The fact that we can do this shows that this expression is antisymmetric in k and q. Right? Because if you put ddu of this on the with the minus sign, right? That's like extending k and q with a minus sign. So this expression, although it doesn't look like it's antisymmetric in K and Q, I can write this. In fact, if you want to see it more explicitly, I can write it as half of this minus integral 0 to epsilon xk of u minus xk naught ddu of xq minus xq.
Here also Q.
Pardon?
The contour is here also.
Contour is
Yes, it's sort of close. Okay, so the minus sign. So now it's clear that this whole expression is antisymmetric under K and Q exchange. So which means that whatever is multiplying it,
must be antisymmetric.
I can antisymmetrize. Well, not that it must be antisymmetric. It need not be antisymmetric, but the symmetric part of this will not contribute.
Yes.
Right? So I can explicitly antisymmetrize this. So this term, then, let me write this term over here. I can write as half of del q gamma I pk. The antisymmetrization is in K and Q. So minus del k gamma I pq minus gamma I gk plus gamma I jq gamma j. Okay, all evaluated x naught. And if you remember your definition of Riemann tensor, you can recognize this as R I P K Q. I think. Okay, the last
IPK.
are antisymmetry. I think it's I P K Q. That's how I define Riemann tensor of x naught. So I'll leave it at this here. Okay. So next time we'll see how to make use of this. But at this stage, it's clear that if the Riemann tensor is 0, okay, then if you take an infinitesimal loop of length L, the monodromy, okay, the change in the vector n vanishes to order epsilon square. Right? So this says that the matrix M. So what did we show? We showed that Ni of epsilon is Ni naught plus order epsilon square if, sorry, not order epsilon
Epsilon
square,
cube.
order epsilon cube if R I J K L and x naught equal to 0. Okay, if it's not 0, then there is an order epsilon square term which is given by this. So in terms of the matrix Mij, this means that Mij x naught C is identity or delta Ij plus order epsilon q if this is 0. Is this clear? Okay, so this still doesn't prove that Mij is really identity, okay, for general loops. Okay, it only says that Mij is delta Ij to certain order, but we will see next time that this is sufficient to prove that Mij is identity for all loops. Okay, but in these issues that we discussed, right, it has to be a simply connected space, okay, and or it has to have no singularity. Okay, then we can prove this in general.
So those conditions we'll try next time.
Pardon?
Those conditions, with those conditions we'll try
Yeah.
next.
So we'll see in what way. Okay, we can now use this result to prove that if the Riemann tensor is 0, then the monodromy is identity on a general group. Okay, with those conditions built in. Okay, but today what you have done is that you have shown that if the Riemann tensor is 0, then this is true. Okay. And if the Riemann tensor is not 0, then you know precisely what the monodromy is to order epsilon square. Yeah, that's given by this. So it's a product of R and this integral over here. Okay, so we'll continue.